Is there a distinction between a human being and a human person? And do unborn children qualify as human persons? Stay tuned to find out. Hello everyone, this is My Two Cents. In our last video of this series, we addressed the question of whether or not an unborn child is a distinct, living, and whole human being. We determined that from a scientific standpoint, this is an uncontroversial matter. All experts agree that from the earliest stages of conception, an unborn child is a living, distinct, and whole human being. However, this is where the debate starts to get much more controversial. To reiterate, since abortion is the willful killing of a living human being, pro-life libertarians hold that abortion is a violation of the non-aggression principle. However, even though it is the case that unborn children are human beings, the pro-choice libertarian still has at least two different counter-arguments that can be made. In this video, we'll address the following claim. While a human being, an unborn child is not a human person. Until such time as it develops to the point where it achieves personhood, abortion is not a violation of the NAP. The concept of personhood does seem to be inherently intuitive. In the world around us, we see many different animals that are conscious, living beings with some capacity to make choices. However, save for some people in the vegan crowd, no one thinks that animals have rights in the same sense that humans do. If it is morally permissible to kill animals for the benefit of human persons, is it not morally acceptable to kill human non-persons for the benefit of human persons? The question of why humans have rights but animals don't could merit a whole video of its own. But I think that this question can be resolved relatively simply by returning to first principles of logic. Remember that underlying any position in any debate are the law of non-contradiction, and stemming from it, the principle of consistency. Opposite ideas cannot be both true and false at the same time and in the same sense. This would be a contradiction. And any true description of reality must not contain contradictions. You can't therefore argue that certain beings have rights and others don't, unless you can demonstrate that there is a fundamental difference between them, grounded in nature itself and not in the subjective opinions of people. So then, is there a fundamental difference between humans and animals, grounded in nature itself, that we might call personhood? I think there is. Let's start with an example of two persons, John and Mark. If we say that John has a right to life, we mean that his life may not be taken from him without proper justification. Mark may not simply kill John because he doesn't like John. However, John's right to life comes with a corresponding obligation. Since he has a right to life, he must also respect the right to life of others. John cannot argue that he has a right to kill Mark even though Mark does not have a right to kill him. This would be a violation of the principle of consistency. Therefore, we see that all rights have corresponding obligations, namely the obligation not to infringe on the rights of others. Why is it then that animals do not have rights? Well, if they did, it would mean they also have the corresponding obligations. A lion, therefore, has a moral obligation not to infringe on the life of a zebra. And bringing it a little closer to home, your cat has a moral obligation not to infringe on the life of a mouse. If your cat kills a mouse, do you think that your cat should be taken to court and prosecuted for violating the non-aggression principle? There are countless more examples we can give, but what immediately becomes clear is that animals lack a capacity for moral reasoning. When a lion kills a zebra, it isn't violating the NAP, it's just a lion being a lion. Animals can't be expected to understand or abide by the non-aggression principle, and therefore they can't have rights. Remember, to argue that animals have rights but not the corresponding obligations would be a violation of the principle of consistency, and therefore cannot be a true description of reality. Considering this, it's clear that whatever personhood is, it's tied to the capacity for moral reasoning, that which separates humans from animals. However, the question now becomes, is a being a person in virtue of the natural capacity for moral reasoning, or in the current capacity for it? By natural capacity, I mean the capacity that comes inherent to what type of being is in question. For example, a human infant lacks the current capacity to walk, but it does possess the natural capacity to do so. We know that as the infant matures, it will eventually acquire the strength necessary to first crawl and then walk. Even if the infant was born with a handicap that guarantees that it will never be able to walk, we still acknowledge that humans are the type of being that possess the natural capacity to walk. We consider it a tragedy whenever a human is afflicted with a handicap that makes them unable to walk. However, we don't consider it a tragedy that a fish is unable to walk. A fish was never the type of being with a capacity to walk, natural or current. If personhood is grounded in a human being's natural capacity, then a human being is a person as soon as they begin to exist, which is, as we already established, at the moment of conception. Therefore, anyone who argues that unborn children are not human persons must be arguing that personhood is grounded in a current capacity as opposed to a natural capacity. Let's see how this plays out when we take it to its logical conclusion. Remember, if you're going to argue that personhood stems from a current capacity rather than a natural capacity, you must be consistent in your application. You don't get to make different rules for different people. Let's imagine that someone argues, a fetus is not a person until such time as it becomes sentient. That would mean that they are arguing that personhood is grounded in the current capacity for sentience, not the natural capacity for it. However, if it is merely sentience that grants personhood, many, if not most animals are also persons. To be consistent then, such a person would have to grant that all sentient beings are persons. You don't get to draw arbitrary lines and say that sentient fetuses are persons, but sentient animals aren't, if it is indeed the case that it is the current capacity for sentience, as opposed to some natural capacity that grants personhood. In his published work, Practical Ethics, bioethicist Peter Singer has argued that consistency demands that he support not only elective abortion, but also elective infanticide. Yes, you heard me right. Singer supports the right of parents to kill their born children up to a certain point. Singer writes, "Human babies are not born self-aware or capable of grasping that they exist over time. They are not persons." He goes on to write, "The life of a newborn is of less value than the life of a pig, a dog, or a chimpanzee." Many people, even in the pro-choice crowd, are rightly abhorred by Singer's assertion. However, Singer is at least being consistent. If personhood is grounded in some current capacity as opposed to a natural capacity, you don't get to make arbitrary distinctions. If the current capacity of a born infant does not exceed those of an animal, you can't claim that the one has rights and the other doesn't. Even if you try and argue that it is something other than sentience that grants personhood, you will run into the same problems, since you will inevitably be arguing for current capacity as opposed to natural capacity. As a final point of discussion, let's consider an adult human being who is in a car accident that leaves them in a temporary coma. During this time, he will require round-the-clock hospital care and the use of advanced medical technology to keep him alive. Suppose further that the doctor determines that it will take at least 9 months of recovery before the person becomes conscious again. Such a person, while still having all his natural capacities as a human being, possesses no more current capacities than a fetus in utero. Is it then morally permissible to actively kill this person? If you're on the pro-choice side and are arguing that a fetus is not a person, what consistent argument can you give as to why it would be wrong to kill the person in a coma, but not the unborn child? The bottom line is that the only position that can be consistently defended is that personhood comes in virtue of a human being's natural capacities, not their current capacities. While an unborn child lacks many current capacities, nothing fundamentally changes in its nature as it matures. The differences between a human's natural capacities and an animal's natural capacities are grounded in nature itself, but the differences in current capacities between various human beings are not. Therefore, to argue that some human beings are persons while others are not is the fallacy of special pleading. But wait, 2 cents. Even if an unborn child is a human being and a human person, let's not forget that it requires the use of its mother's body in order to survive for 9 months. An unborn child may have the same right to life that you or I do, but it does not have the right to use its mother's body without her consent. Some of you have already left this position in the comment section of the previous videos, and let me say that of all the arguments in favor of the pro-choice position, I think that this one has the most promise. However, you'll have to come back for the final video in order to hear why I don't think this position holds either. Until then, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe. You can also hit the bell to ensure you're notified every time I upload a new video. This video was made possible by my patrons. If anyone else would like to donate and help ensure that I have the time and resources to keep putting out content, for just $1 a month on Patreon or Maker Support, you'll have your name listed in the end credits of every video and the link to one of your social media platforms listed in the description. You can also support the channel by purchasing My 2 Cents merchandise on Teespring. You can also follow me on Twitter, Minds.com, BitChute, WordPress, Gab, and iTunes. Uploads are every Thursday and Saturday, so stay tuned for more videos.